Well, hello, everybody. It's so great to finally be here with you all. It's absolutely lovely.
Likewise.
Yes, and to share my guests with you. We're here to talk about the fourth industrial revolution and the impact on cyber jobs. As you can tell in my intro, I'm super excited. It's taken me a little bit of time to assemble the SMEs that I want here because of how busy they are, but we're here and this is super important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask everybody that's here with me for this discussion to introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump into it, and we're going to share a lot of good, not just knowledge, but discussion. So on that note, I'm Deidre Diamond, founder and CEO of CyberSN and Secure Diversity, and it's my pleasure to be here. I really care about jobs and how people feel about their jobs and in their jobs and loving their jobs. I am very fortunate to have loved my job since I graduated college. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And we're not here today on that, but because I have that, I want others to have it. So this conversation is really important to me. So on that note, Aman, will you introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, indeed. Hi, everyone. Aman Raheja. I'm the CISO at Humana, and I'm also the head of IT operations there. I've been in the cybersecurity field for a number of years. And most recently, before joining Humana, I spent quite a few years in healthcare sector and financial sector both. So happy to be here and looking forward to this interesting discussion. Thank you.
Yay, awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Sue.
Hi, hello. My name is Sue Yi, and I lead cybersecurity operations for Highmark Health, which represents both a health insurance as well as a hospital environment. And I've been in security for about close to 20 years. My passion is in operations, specifically with data security and engineering.
Awesome. It's a privilege to have you. Thank you. Tim.
Yes, hello everybody. Tim Williams. I'm the Director of Information Security and Cyber Risk at Zoll Medical, a company focused on creating IoT devices, life-saving medical devices, and creating cloud-based SaaS products that help support clinicians and first responders. I've been in security for about going on 20 years. I cut my teeth in the financial sector and banking specifically, pivoted over to healthcare, and it's been about 8 years in healthcare now. I'm glad to be here.
So awesome. We have serious SMEs here, and it just so happens, not that we needed to make this about healthcare, we've got healthcare SME experts of cyber and technology. And so I would imagine a lot of what we're going to hear is related to your environments. And how wonderful is that? This is one of the hottest issues we have, is how does healthcare going to keep up with society and our needs. And so I'm, super excited to hear what you all have to say. So here's how it all started, everybody. So Aman and I were in a discussion, and was sharing with him my passion of people loving jobs. And he started talking about a book by Klaus Schwab, which I have here with me, called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. And of course, the minute I got off of that call with him, I ordered it on Amazon. And it really blew my mind. I mean, the conversation we had was wonderful. And yet, wow, there's a lot here that I hadn't been thinking about. And so, with Aman's passion for solving jobs and scalability, and the fact that we don't have enough people in cyber, that really sparked my brain to check this out. And then it just so happened, talking to Sue and talking to Tim over the months, I felt them feeling the same way. And I thought, you know what, let's get together and talk about this. Let's share. The community is also, I'm sure, either thinking about this a lot or would love to spend some more time thinking about it. So let me just read from Klaus's book in terms of what he's talking about in terms of the fourth industrial revolution for everybody. So it began at the turn of this century and builds on the digital revolution. It is characterized by a much more ambiguous and mobile internet, by smaller and more powerful sensors, and have become cheaper, and by artificial intelligence and machine learning. And isn't that interesting? When I read that, and then I read this stat a few pages later, which was mind-blowing. Here it is, that storing 1 gigabyte costs on average of less than 0.3 cents a year today, compared with more than $10,000 20 years ago. And so there's this interesting correlation with corporate revenue or revenue in general and the economy that has really flourished in the fourth industrial revolution, and yet jobs, are affected every day, and most people are afraid of losing their job to technology. And so there's a lot going on here, is my point. There's a lot, always there's good, and then there seems to be not so good with things, is my point. And so I'm sure you all are challenged with that every day. And so Aman, based on that, your challenges, that you're faced with every day, and how you think about the fourth industrial revolution and the impact of jobs. Talk to us, share with us, and when this journey started with you. How did it start with you in terms of taking this, into your workspace?
Let me start with a similar stat to what you mentioned, by the way, first. Do you remember about 25 years ago using 24 or 14 kbps modems? Yeah. They used to make weird sounds. And now I have 200 Mbps coming in, and sometimes I'm like, it's not feeling fast enough, right? So, similar to your storage capacity analogy, that's how far things have come in 25 years. And I think I see a lot of predictions on what will happen in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And I don't know if anyone can tell. Just by looking at the exponential growth that has already happened, if it's a similar graph, the possibilities are so great for what we can do just as humankind. So one of the things I really like about this book is it does talk about a lot of promising things that will happen, like whether it's from data analytics standpoint, AI standpoint, how can it really change the world? And it's already happening. So whether it's cars that are driving themselves, and with pretty soon trucks driving themselves, to you talking to your IoT devices at home. Now, in some cases, kids have ordered stuff they shouldn't because it's easy to order things that because you have a assistant at home to do that for you. Taking a step back, one of the things besides this book that I was also reading about in many different statistics was potentially there will be a 20 to 30 time increase in volume of number of attacks within the next 5 years. That's pretty significant multiplier. If you add to it another factor, a lot of organizations moving to cloud, pick any cloud provider, does not matter. What's also hard in that environment is to manage that many identities. You're actually producing a lot of workloads and you're continuously shifting among workloads. And if you don't automate, it's just not scalable with the way we used to do. So that prompted me to start thinking at least some of these operational areas where we have a lot of task-oriented work, you have to think differently. It's not a sustainable path doing what we've been doing all along. So that was kind of the trigger to start saying and challenging our own teams and start thinking differently on what do we do, how do we shift to be ready for that future. None of the jobs go away if you think about it. You just do something different. A lot of these people become from doers to creators, from analysts to engineers, right? That's the big shift that happens because someone's still got to sit down and automate, and more will keep coming.
Right. And that's music to my ears because, eyes on glass, which is what a lot of analysts do, is not a scalable, love of work over time either, So I love hearing that they're become engineers, which is absolutely mentally more challenging and wonderful. And I agree. And we see that today, but it's just it takes so long to happen. It takes so long for somebody to become an engineer from an analyst. In fact, it's one of the biggest reasons in the job gaps is people think that, just because somebody's new to security, they're going to be, valuable in an engineering role right away. It takes a lot. It takes 3 to 5 years to really get that engineering. So, I'm sure people with automation will learn faster too, because they're not caught doing the remedial repetitive tasks like you're saying, right? So what I'm hearing from you is you're saying attacks are going to increase so significantly that there's no way we would be able to handle them in our current system. And so we must create automation. So are you doing that yourself, Aman, or are you like, what is the automation solution in that scenario look like?
Yeah, so relatively new, obviously, like, where I am only a year. So yeah, we are leveraging a lot of tools that exist, whether it's security operations space and identity access management space, to make sure that we move more towards automation. The other thing is, for last 20 years, and I know it's been shifting pretty significantly, a lot of times security has come later, right, to add to whatever was developed. But that's also shifting. If you build security into everything you do and build that automation into what you do, that will reduce the load that will otherwise have. Because I don't know, you can tell me that what's the statistics. I think the latest I heard was more than 1 million jobs open globally or something like that in cybersecurity.
2.5.
Okay, 2.5. Okay, I'm probably reading some old stat. But the point is, if that number keeps growing, what is the remedy?
Right.
And the attacks keep growing. There's incidents we hear literally every day, a number of them.
Yeah.
So we got to do something different.
Yeah, that's the scary part of how long it takes somebody to be productive. And so to me, part of the automation would be to change the sort of, that trajectory of developing a security professional too. So like you said, for instance, if we're creating products, applications, whatever they are, with security in mind, then that's a big way to wipe out all these remedial security tasks that, let's say, an analyst needs to do, whereas they could be thinking and working on the creating engineering side, right? And working with greater capacity. And so they're going to develop faster. And so I love that you're saying it's not just that we have to build automation tools, it's that we must put security first. I mean, there was breaches recently as of this week, and I guarantee you some of that stuff, like camera stuff, is bolted on later, right? Like, it happens. Everybody's really just getting to this place of security first.
I think even with security first, there's for many of these enterprises like ours, we operate with a lot of disparate technology and tools, and we then produce a lot of disparate technology and tools. And trying to come up with, a master plan is oftentimes very difficult. That says, okay, this is how security is all baked in, and we've shifted left and we've embraced DevSecOps. We could have those as aspirational goals, but with the rise in threat actors embracing automation themselves, embracing machine learning and AI, those of us who have to defend our enterprises, if we're not doing the same thing, we're automatically on the losing team, right?
Yeah.
So for us to even meet the threat actors like at the threshold, we have to be keeping up at pace. And as for your question about or the topic regarding how people can continue to love their jobs in security, and the migration from you start off as an analyst with eyes on glass, and then you become an engineer. Being an analyst at the top of your game is being able to do data analytics. It's being able to find the unknown, what we sometimes call threat hunting, and finding that really awesome nugget that says, okay, we've got something here and we've got to do the investigation, and being able to provide that high level of validation to the rest of the organization that says, yeah, we're good. We have a very defensible posture. All of that takes a lot of brain power. Not compute power, it's brain power. The only way we can free up that brain power is when we're leveraging all of the machinery and all of our compute power and all of our tools, and letting the stuff that can be automated, just let it be done via automation. right? All of the lower level work, everything from ticket management or automated response to a particular known, anomaly, let that all be automated. Free up your analysts and your engineers to be able to put their human brain power to what actually needs to be addressed, and just, provide them with a little bit of balance, when it comes to, how much stress that they're probably under already.
Yeah. Yeah. So how hard is this? Like how, like that's...
So in actuality, I would say, yes, there is a learning curve. But, what we expect at Highmark of our analysts is that they're not embracing the same solutions for productivity that they embraced 20 years ago. If we're talking about the fact that storage is a microcosm of a percentage, compared to what it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, and the speed of our connectivity is light years from where it was 20 years ago, why are we still using the same productivity tools that we were 20 years ago? How many of our people are still using, spreadsheets and documents and, manually managing data versus teaching the systems and the applications to talk to each other and share the data and manage the data for us? There's a lot of low code products that we can use for automation, that we are using for automation. I know at Highmark right now, we're leveraging a lot of RPA, because you can teach a bot to do what a human would be doing, right? And it's low code entry. These are technologies that I think are possible because of 4IR or Industry 4.0 that allow us to then take advantage of it and increase our own efficacy and our own abilities, as actual people and analysts. So while maybe some of the large data analytics projects for security do require training and education and a lot of math and science, there's some low entry items that I think we need to encourage our staff to embrace and, give them those carrots so that they at least test and plan. And if they start removing 10% of some of the low value, work, then great. That's 10% more brain power we can contribute and apply to the harder issues.
Right.
I've been able to, at the moment, not that it'll be this way forever, but I've been able to get away from even having any security analysts, right? I've hired security engineers and architects who used to be analysts, but I've been able to take those analyst cycles and really build in that orchestration and automation and RPA, and some of the pre-built tools like firewall. Next generation technologies can have built-in machine learning and artificial intelligence. Endpoint security team, our tools can do the same. So we've been able to focus on that with support from a third party to really build that infrastructure to make sure that we're looking at the right things, we're automating the right things, so that my guys, while they might dip their toes into analyst work at times, to the broader point of the team here, they're largely focused with strategy, not being what I would call a button pusher, but really putting on their visionary hats and protecting our organization proactively, and eventually getting away from being reactive for every single threat scenario.
It seems daunting if I'm a big, older company to me. I always say, like, I couldn't imagine being a CEO of those companies and dealing with risk, and how they could ever get their heads around it. So, it's daunting for everybody, don't get me wrong, but it seems even more daunting. I mean, everything's separated and all around. Like, how close are we, I guess, is my point. I mean, if Aman stat in 5,000 years, how many more attacks are we getting?
20 to 30 times in 5 years.
What? How are we gonna?
The thing to actually, Sue brought up a really great point about the analyst engineer aspect. And I think connecting back to your earlier question, in some cases, you may not be necessarily needing to convert every analyst into engineer. You may need both, to Sue's point, but you make them like two peas in a pod type of concept where, because threat hunting is a great example. That's what I was pointing to that Sue brought up. That still requires a lot of brain power, but you can also have an engineer with the threat hunting analyst that is automating everything they can, so the analyst can spend more time on the complex aspects of threat hunting and keep feeding into that queue that keeps building and creating more automation. And so going back to your question about where are we in that process, very far. Yeah. For us to change this in next 3, 4, 5 years, it will require a very concerted, very deliberate, and significant amount of effort and some investment, which we typically call the bubble cost, which you have to take on and make that investment to come on the other side of it a whole lot better. So the organizations will have to go through that hump to do it. I also know a lot of organizations that will just not do it, and they just want to deal with what they have. And that's not because the security organizations or my peers don't realize they don't have the support right. from the organizations to be able to do it. And that's where you will continue to see, similar to incidents we've seen recently in the press, where, just make up an example. I create certain IoT device for only consumer, right? It's not a medical, like in Tim's case, where you have to be more sensitive. It's just a consumer device. I don't care. I give this example to people, and I'll just mention this last thing because it's very interesting. I bought some of those electrical remote control plugs that you can get from Amazon for like $7 each near Thanksgiving to control my Christmas lights at home. And by the way, I still have a Linux server here down under my desk, which can do a lot of fancy things. And after I installed it, one time I was just sniffing on my own network, and I'm seeing there's a lot of traffic going outside US from that device. Like, what is it even doing, right? I mean, I can see it, but most people can't see it. And I don't know if there's a malware in that device with wherever it came from, or someone actually broke into it, or someone's taking my tax documents from my laptop and sending it out. I have no way to tell. It was encrypted, and data is leaving my network from that device, going to the internet. And so not everyone can think of these kind of scenarios on their daily life, right? But it's very real, and that's what we're seeing happening over and over again, why we keep hearing so many incidents, because organizations are still not prepared, even in current situation, let alone the statistics I'm talking about 5 years from now.
Yeah. So there's two things that Aman just brought up that I want to double click into for a second. First, for anyone who's watching this, and for anyone who's considering a career in cyber, when you're not in your office or in your office time, I hope that you are still embracing your intent to be a practitioner. So I think it's amazing, and I think it's awesome that Aman has a Linux server and he's got probably a Kali box running somewhere. I know because I've got one couple at home as well, and I've got an onion router that I'm looking at some of the traffic at my house. But that's really, that's one thing that I think is really important, is people embrace the love of cyber and the natural curiosity that hopefully everyone kind of embodies. But other than that, I think when it comes to how we help our enterprises and how people can, as security practitioners, help their enterprises get through this transformation, right? This whole concept of digital transformation is to identify how security is going to enable that organization to get over that hump, to actually transform into a digital enterprise and embrace that. There are some very, specific measurements and KPIs that once we are able to measure it, once we're able to produce that data, you use that as part of your business case. You use that as part of your argument of how you can use security to enable the business to do so securely, to not be in the press, so to speak. But it's measuring the ability for security to reduce the risk and the churn while increasing the customer satisfaction. And how is security's role going to then increase adoption, for instance, of a product out in the consumer market? That's all really critical, especially for security leaders, right? Yeah. So for those who are looking at security leadership as part of their career, don't stop thinking about necessarily the widgets and how the gears are turning. It's now, how do you explain this to your board? How do you explain it to your CEO, where you're going to help them? You're going to be that partner, not necessarily the blocker.
Yeah.
I would even say that, and I love the term you use, Sue, transformation. Excuse me. So I think we're also battling human behavior, right? Most people are resistant to change. You got to drag people kicking and screaming, even more so as it relates to cybersecurity. So the ability that you spoke about at the end there, the ability to go to the board and influence change is very important for any security leader. So that really resonated with me.
Totally. It's the number one challenge I see, is the security leaders having the budget to even fill their jobs. Like, that's my number one obstacle. So jobs been open, right? Some of because you work with me, but that's the number one obstacle. The budget to pay my firm to fill the role, and yet it's open 6 months, 9 months, a year, suggests to me that above isn't really, committed to filling the jobs, especially since I ran a very large IT software staffing firm, and I never had that problem. And so it's, I feel for you all. It's one of the things that motivates me every day, and how I service and build technologies to make recruiting cheaper for you all. And yet it's there. And so, if that's there, I can only imagine what it's like to walk in and sell the kind of spend that's needed to be ready for what's about to hit us in 5 years. And which is why I think also part of this is you all as leaders out there probably leveraging each other will possibly help share each other's data, what have you, because as you both just said, Sue, Tim, the more data you have, the better that is the easier that's gonna be. And so anyhow, my long-winded point is to say I'm scared, actually, because I see how these jobs just even sit open. So yeah, we're short, 500,000 here in the US, but ultimately about 89% of cyber professionals don't love where they work, literally don't love where they work. And so if you got a good story, you can get people, you can fill all of your jobs. It costs money to have the expertise to go, how do you match those people? How do you find those people? That's a difficult thing to do, a needle in a haystack. There's only 800,000 cyber professionals in the US, and that's all roles. So, the recruiting process is a needle in a haystack, never mind the fact that a security engineer could be 15 different profiles. So, and most recruiters work off of titles and buzzwords, right? Yeah. So, for me on the outside, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's not really fun to be woke in this, in this story. And so I don't know if anybody's got any hope words or what have you, but I'm hearing that we're just starting this automation process, and yet it's daunting for not just the scope of it, but for as Aman was saying, who really cares? How deeply does everyone care about not being in the press today?
Well, there's an aspect of how well have we done to actually show the metrics to the management. That actually plays a pretty big factor. I've been there, by the way, probably been guilty of it a long time ago. You're about to show a metrics book probably there, so that you know, um,
Yeah.
yeah, there you go.
That's
The
massive.
challenge being
Important.
if you're not able to show data, all board CEOs, CFOs, they can connect with information that's shown as clearly as your security incidents were, I'm just making it up, 22 years ago, they're 800 now, and at that rate, your projection is next year there might be 2,000, right? So again, totally made up numbers, but that data can tell you story what you want to and need to prepare for. But being able to lay that out as clearly as that is not easy to do either. You can't obviously predict all of it, but if you have enough to support based on history, based on information that's available across the industry, because whether you join some of the ISACs or other forums that are available, there's a lot of benchmarking data that's available. Now, to be fair, I'm not saying depend only on benchmarking data. I do stress on that, by the way, because there's a lot of apples to oranges comparison in that benchmark data, but it is directionally something that you can learn from to inform your discussion, which will help going forward. So I think data is extremely powerful. And by the way, going back to my point about if your attacks become so high, if you don't automate to gather that data and put those numbers together, it will just continue to make the job harder and harder.
Right.
And Aman, I do agree with that. I love presenting metrics, but I also love the narrative and the stories around those metrics, right?
Indeed.
Earlier, Deidre mentioned, a particular medical device or a camera manufacturer, IoT device that was hacked. So those are the stories that I feel resonate with the board. If I say, hey, we've had 2,000, vulnerabilities, and we remediated 10% of them. Sure, a executive can consume that data, but it's so much more powerful to say just one of those vulnerabilities can lead to what happened over here in this organization where patient data was breached, hardware was compromised, negative publicity, things of that nature. So again, I love presenting metrics along with the story. And I do believe that is really what creates organization, and that's what creates the ability for executives to really listen to security and fund security.
So there's
Wonderful point.
a framework we use called the BOSITE, and I'll have to double check with my leaders to make sure I'm saying it correctly, but it's business outcomes, and then the security improvement, and then the actual technical enhancement. And oftentimes, as practitioners, we may focus on the technical enhancement because we intrinsically will understand if I upgrade X, if I implement Y technology or tool, whatever that shiny widget is, that it's going to give me better telemetry, it's going to give me better insight, hopefully, or just improved detections because it's such a better fill in the blank. But if you start measuring then what are your security improvements, right? How much better? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Are you exponentially increasing your ability to have line of sight? And then take that security improvement and translate it into something like a compliance metric or risk reduction or an operational excellence metric or a customer satisfaction metric, because that's how you're going to then change that conversation and then translate your technical skill set to a leadership skill set or a management skill set. So being able to correlate it with an actual business outcome. So we talked about how with 4IR or Industry 4.0, there's also a lot of embracing of cloud and cloud technologies and using that to sort of power how all of these IoTs talk and how the smart factories work. But that means a lot of data that's in the cloud, which means it's not data that you've got like your hands around anymore, right? It's somewhere else. Well, what does that mean? Start using your 5 whys. Start using all of those great project management principles to extrapolate how is this going to impact the business if we don't have our S3 buckets secured,
Right.
Go through that mind exercise, because as security practitioners, we're not just the engineers, right? We're just not the ones instrumenting a lot of the technology. We've got to be the ones who actually who speak as though we're right there with the business. So if marketing has an outcome that they've got to, have X amount of business and business development, then how are we enabling them? Because we're going to then be able to secure all their sites and all of their, campaigns, and how we're going to secure all the CRM data and all of the business development, objectives. That's how we need to speak in terms of cybersecurity. And that's how we're going to then connect Industry 4.0 with what our CEO wants, regardless of the vertical, regardless of the industry, right? It makes then the skill sets that so many of our staff have kind of universal, right? And that's a really critical component, especially when we're talking about how do we retain our staff and encourage them to enjoy their job, right? 80+% of our staff don't like where they're working. That's a problem, right? Because then we're never going to be able to win the battle.
It's scary. Yeah. 89%. I mean, love is the word. Don't love it. And open to recruiting calls. How's that? 89%. That's ISC squared stats. That's everybody's stats. My stats. We see, because of all the great matching we do, the people we place are literally staying 3 times longer, which is why I want to get my data in Snowflake, and we're working on that. But the reality is that they're not happy. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the tasks and the job that they're doing. Let's remember that people leave people more than they, they're not leaving necessarily technology. However, the culture and the people could be, sort of, mentally stressed just based on the work being sort of tedious, if you will. It is the stat. And that's why I also encourage organizations that you can hire and retain if, in security, even with this shortage, without a doubt, if you really are stay in tune with your people. And so, so I keep coming, but I'd like to come back to that, okay, so why, how we need to be able to sell up a lot better, because we're not getting the funding we need, whether it be for people or strategy. I think we get plenty for technology. That's my opinion. From somebody that sold Rapid7 as the first VP of sales, 15 years ago, and then having the experience of 7 years of owning CyberSN, I still believe that statement. And yet, I heard the word narrative, Tim, is you were talking about stories. And so I often think to myself, how much data do we really have on other people's, problems, i.e. breaches, such that we can really, sort of paint the picture of what that means, that X patient records were, taken over. Like, how much is, brand disruption, legalities? Like, is there a framework for that yet, to be able to go into these meetings and say, okay, here's what it would affect in terms of brand. Here's what it would affect in terms of compliance. Here's what it would affect in terms of regulatory standards. Here's what it would affect in terms of death or injuries, or like, is there a framework for that yet? Like, I would, if I was
I think, well, there's two that I'm aware of. One is FAIR, Factor Analysis of Information Risk. And that's the book I was holding up, actually.
Okay.
The other one is Variant. Variant is a more technical framework, which distills the factors that led to like a root cause analysis database.
Okay.
FAIR is really more of an ontology system that looks at all of the components that lead to information risk, and then extrapolates how you can measure, how you can manage, based on breaches that have occurred, for instance. So it takes a lot of that historical data. But I think most enterprises also lean into cyber insurance carriers, who tend to have a little bit of secret sauce and some, analytics engines. But this goes back to our original discussion about 4IR. what's one of the pillars of the fourth industrial revolution is data analytics, is business intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah. Tim, you were going to say something on this, and I want to comment on insurance. Like, okay, so is there safety now because of insurance that's causing the lack of investment? I mean, we're getting investments, don't get me wrong, but nothing like, there's going on in IT. Let's say, so what are you thinking, Tim? I saw your brain. I felt your brain.
So cybersecurity insurance would certainly help with some of the costs as it relates to, litigations and, remediation and all of that kind of good stuff. The one thing that you can't recover with cybersecurity insurance is your reputational brand damage, right? You can't recover that. So that just takes time and patience. What I was going to say earlier is I've been able to kind of curate those narratives by using, if I'm saying the name right, Poneman. They come up with some really good ways to quantify the cost of a breach. So if you're a healthcare organization, you can almost incorporate it into your technology risk standard, right? If Poneman says the cost of a PHI record is $1,000 a record, then you can almost do your business impact analysis and your risk analysis based off of that particular technology system stores, processes, transmits, 500 patient records, and then you can almost quantify what that risk is. So I have found Poneman as well as the Verizon breach report a good way of, and I never present something, I never grab something and present it, but you grab it, you take the metrics, you grab the story, then you put it into a format that'll be easily relatable and easily presentable to executive leaders or even some of your colleagues. So I found that approach to work. But yeah, there's always cybersecurity insurance as an umbrella from a financial impact perspective. But again, I think what resonates a little bit more with execs is we don't want this to happen to us because we're going to lose a bunch of customers. And how do you recover from that?
I hope that's what they're feeling. And that's what I'm wondering. I'm just wondering if the insurance, and even insurance companies sort of selling that you don't need to worry so much if you have insurance. You got to wonder, because here's what's on my mind. Let's look at Target or Equifax, their brand, they're doing great.
Yeah.
What breaches have really hurt a brand, I wonder? It doesn't feel good to be in the paper, but really we all know that money is all that people are really, basing hurt on. Maybe somebody gets fired or whatever, few people get fired, but nobody really cares about that. It's the revenue, it's the stock market, it's how it affects that. And so when I think of, and I watch these breaches over the years, I'm thinking, well, who was affected from a brand? I'm sure there are, but who? I can't even think of them on the top of my head.
Well, there is another aspect though, which is the opportunity cost. So yeah, there was a breach, and again, I won't know the numbers, what happens inside of any of these organizations or others. In some cases, tens, in some cases of hundreds of millions of dollars that got spent doing a lot of things that would have been spent better if they were proactive, right? So, and that's the dollars now you're diverting from creating new business enabling features. You're doing things that right? So you are losing that opportunity. So for every company that has recovered, obviously they have not recovered because they had a breach. Right? I don't think no one is drawing any correlation there. Every company is doing better than, if you're just measuring their stock price, better than where they were. But you would only imagine if they didn't have to divert their $300 million or $500 million, depending on who's impacted when, they would have had more opportunity to grow into new markets, new products, do things.
Yeah,
that's that would have been cheaper done.
Don't forget that there's a regulatory component to a lot of this as well. There's a crisis, and then there's more regulation. Then there's another crisis, and there's more regulation. And every time there's regulation, there's a price tag associated with it, right? And it can lead to lost business opportunities, lost markets, and sometimes the inability to operate as an organization, where then that will disrupt the obviously disrupt the business. But there's we may not see companies necessarily being wiped off the books or wiped off NASDAQ and the Dow industry list right now, but I think it's a matter of when it continues to hit closer and closer to home, and we move. And I'm saying this because we're all healthcare professionals here. We see more impacting the actual individual, the human, the life. I'd be interested to see what's happening in Germany right now, right? There was the ransomware incident that impacted a German hospital. It then led to a patient death.
Yeah.
If we think that that's not impacting how organizations will operate in that country, then we're not keeping our eyes open.
Yeah, like meaning, so an organization can keep their revenues, they can keep their, stock growing and maybe not feel that type of brand damage, but internally, the people themselves, the people working within the organization, when let's say a death is happening or, dealing with the pressures, that is making them care more, right, and get out of the revenue piece. But also adding to what Aman said is the lost opportunity piece. Like, that's huge. And if I can envision, like, are we presenting that? Are we sharing when we're going to get budgets, approved? Are we really putting highlight, like you all just did, to that cost, where you could be doing something else, could be building new business lines, expanding business lines, but instead we're bogged down with dealing with a breach. We're dealing with regulatory costs that come from that, legal costs that come from that, investigation, is that a part of a framework? Because if it's not, add it, please, because that makes sense to me. Because I feel like the other stuff isn't hitting anywhere, like the money piece.
Our both side framework that we're leveraging, there isn't a single project in our security department that can go live without putting in a business case that maps it back to a business outcome. And part of the business outcome measurement is, in the event of a breach or in the event of an anomaly, what is the impact to that particular line of business? And measure it. Even if it's a swag, measure it. And then grade yourself as the project continues against whether or not you're providing those same elements.
Look at what worst case scenario per department, so to speak, and then measure from there. Right. That's a lot of work.
And again, that's why I'm always about the metric and the narrative, right? So we're kind of talking about a framework, but sometimes it transcends a framework and it just becomes a board level discussion, right? So security professionals are going to say, hey, this is what happened to Target in 2013. We'd find something more new and relevant, but that shouldn't just be a metric. That should be a conversation, because ideally, we want to position these narratives in a way where the execs and the business leaders are going to say, man, how is that going to impact my line of business? It shouldn't be us as security professionals telling them how their business may be impacted. They should be really reading in between the lines and helping us to create that narrative. So that is a approach.
Right.
That actually goes right to, what we call threat modeling. Right? When we think about threat modeling, we think about a very technical set of procedures, with an application and looking at code. But if you were to distill that up to a management and leadership level, that's exactly what that is. That conversation with the board is you're modeling threat, but you're doing it in a tabletop or a simulation. And I would encourage everyone to bring their board or their leadership into those discussions. And just go through even simulations like that. I think they're very, very worthwhile. And connecting it back to the discussion about cyber insurance, insurance is is the last resort, right? But you won't get cyber insurance unless you prove that you have all these other preventive, detective, other protection controls in place. You've got a strong, mature security program. You've got staff who are dedicated. And once you can prove that, then you'll probably get some insurance. Sort of, that's like the last resort, right? That's like your catch-all. But it is really critical to make sure that you're playing through those scenarios with your management team. And for those who are in our industry, in cybersecurity, again, it's a skill set to have. It's a skill set to be able to have those conversations and speak the language of the business and not just the language of security tools and instrumentation.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Well, insurance companies have gotten a lot smarter. Right? After getting hit so many times, they had to get better as well in how they calculate their own risks, because there's liabilities that they have to pay. Going back to the other point around and the narrative that Tim, you were talking about, I think the interesting thing is to strike the balance between what you said and Tim, what you said, which is how do you connect it back to your own organization? Because it can't be, just scaring people all the time, because you have to be able to talk about what are the outcomes, how does the business benefit? So X happened somewhere else. Can it happen here? I think whenever you talk about X happened somewhere else, it is an obvious question that gets asked, right? So just talking about, there's a field that's been around a long time now. We made investment as well from a threat intelligence standpoint. You gather threat intel, you bring it all together, you do analysis on it, you connect the dots to what can happen in our environment if similar threat were to you were about to come across, and you present that picture. It can be very impactful. It can actually help a lot if you follow the entire chain, not stop at, here are bad things happening. Well, everyone's reading Wall Street Journal, so they know that part. Right. But connecting the dots directly back to your own metrics. So something happened because privilege IDs were not protected. My metrics show I'm only doing X percentage today. Right now, you can build a story on, there's an example, here's how we are, and have that narrative on what does it mean for an organization and what we can do about it. And that's a way to get the right support. Just one last thing from my end, back to the whole talent piece. We're still at the point where we're looking for people at number of different levels, right, from junior most to senior. The point I want to go back to, Deidre, about what you said about the budget. I actually don't feel there's lack of budgets in more organizations. I was given an example where some organizations struggle, but if there are 500,000 jobs open, there's a different problem we haven't solved yet. And I'm not saying take the budget off the table from a problem standpoint. All I'm saying is there's another bigger problem that's unresolved, because one of the budget discussion, I'll use my own organization example. If my team comes to me and says, we need 200 more people, and I know we struggled to fill even 50 last year. Right. What's the point of approving 200 more people? Right. So you have to then think what you can do, how much can you bite, and then accordingly make plans so you can actually deliver and meet your commitments.
Right. Except for, I'd like to say, if you gave me all 50 of those, I'd fill them. And I stand by that. You have it on recording. I mean, again, now if every company took me up on that, it wouldn't happen. Of course, if everybody took me up on it, but I could fill 50 cloud security people, literally. Now, because people don't love where they work, and I know where they are, and I know how to defer, and so does everybody that works here, based on our technology and our brains, where they're at in their career and why, and company and strategy. In fact, I just released a blog on talent exfiltration. So read it, everybody. It was my RSA talk last year. But, you know, I hear you. There is two problems for sure. It's, well, first of all, you know, we don't have to look any further than diversity to see why we also have a talent gap when we sell girls on there. They shouldn't be in tech, and they, you know, these jobs aren't for them in society. This is traditionally what we've been selling. And so we're living in that world. But then second of all, of just how long it takes to actually get somebody, you know, to be able to be productive. You all are very smart people. This is a lot of brain power. And so it's all three of those things together that we should look at. And so I completely agree with you. And what a great way to wrap, because I would love to have part two and get deeper into what can we automate. You know, let's do that. Let's get back together in a couple of months and talk through what can we automate and why, and potentially how. We don't have to talk about technologies, and yet I'm fine with people wanting to. I think people could use, you know, hearing from you all who are ahead of probably most in this conversation. So I want to thank all three of you for being in this conversation. It's so important. I love that you're tying, you know, job happiness to business efficiencies, all of you. And I know all of you personally, so I can say that statement, and I do work with all of you, which is lovely too. So on that note, thank you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Aman, thank you for bringing this to my attention. This is something that we can really dive in and talk together, and Tim and Sue for participating in what Aman sparked, and we'll just keep this going. So I look forward to it.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.